wrestlers who became stars in ECW during the 90s became synonymous with the cult-like promotion, even if they went on to wrestle in other places, including WWE, after ECW closed. While some are still cashing in on their ECW fame and getting those 3 letters chanted at them decades later, some big-name wrestlers only got the tiniest taste of the ECW experience before they were out the door. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 wrestlers who had just one ECW match. Join us. Number 10, King Kong Bundy. When ECW was still an NWA affiliate and stood for Eastern Championship Wrestling, the promotion was a place you would often see WWE stars from yesteryear show up. The likes of Don Morocco and Jimmy Snuka, for example, were tremendously important in those early days and added a much-needed dose of credibility and star power. The main event of the first ever November to Remember in 1993 was certainly a star-studded affair, billed as a dream partner tag match with Sabu and Terry Funk choosing partners for a winner-take-all match where Sabu's ECW heavyweight title and Funk's ECW TV title were both on the line. Sabu chose Road Warrior Hawk, while the Funker drafted in the man who main evented WrestleMania 2 opposite Hulk Hogan. This was certainly a shocker to the ECW faithful, as Bundy hadn't wrestled in close to 6 years. In another shocker, Bundy turned on Funk to cost him the bout and make Sabu a double champ. Perhaps his appearance at the ECW arena gave Bundy the itch, as he came out of semi-retirement and ended up re-signing with WWE in the summer of '95. Number 9, Mabel. Speaking of big men, they don't come much bigger than Nelson Frazier, aka Mabel, do they? Big magnificent bastard. Frazier had something of a late career renaissance on WWE's rebooted ECW as Big Daddy V, where he feuded with CM Punk over the ECW title. What a lot of fans probably don't know or don't remember is that Big Nelson, as Mabel, had shown up in the original ECW about a decade beforehand. After a brawl broke out between the full-blooded Italians and Tommy Rogers and Chris Chetti at the 1998 November to Remember pay-per-view, Mabel and Ulf Herman came out to turn the tide for the FBI. Just as Mabel was about to splash Chetti through a table, however, little Spike Dudley came to the rescue, resulting in an impromptu handicap match. Spike had been on a giant-killing tear in recent times and made quick work of his 2 much larger opponents, with Mabel missing a splash through a table as both he and Herman took acid drops before Spike pinned the pair of them. This was clearly just a one-off to continue Spike's giant killer gimmick, and Frazier was back in WWE soon after as Ministry of Darkness member Viscera. Number 8, Bobby Eaton and Arn Anderson. The Forbidden Door was blown off its hinges in 1994 when Paul Heyman was able to bring in former Dangerous Alliance members Arn Anderson and Bobby Eaton for ECW's When Worlds Collide event. ECW and WCW had come to a mutual agreement, with ECW helping to promote WCW's upcoming Slamboree pay-per-view, which was taking place in Philadelphia, in exchange for Anderson and Eaton showing up there. WCW also offered to use ECW talent on their television show for a few weeks, but Heyman nixed that idea. ECW would actually later sue WCW for using the When Worlds Collide name for a AAA pay-per-view they were co-promoting, but hey, they were sort of friends for a minute there, I guess. The presence of WCW stars certainly helped ECW at When Worlds Collide, since the show drew over 1,500 fans, the highest in the promotion's history to that point. In the main event, Anderson teamed with Terry Funk in a losing effort to Eaton and Sabu in what was a very good 20-minute match when Sabu forced Funk to submit. Number 7, Jinsei Shinzaki and Hayabusa. ECW didn't just have a talent exchange agreement with WCW during the 90s. They also had one with WWE, and I'm sure Heyman was beyond thankful for the Brackers loan, as well as kindred Japanese outfit FMW. The relationship led to Masato Tanaka joining ECW for an extended run, and it was actually Tanaka who was originally supposed to team with masked high-flying sensation Hayabusa at Heatwave 98, before Heyman was able to bring in his regular partner Jinsei Shinzaki, formerly known as Hakushi, instead. Hayabusa and Shinzaki challenged Rob Van Dam and Sabu at the pay-per-view in a match that really divided fans and critics. For some, it was a breathtaking display of athleticism and innovation that just about stole the show. For others, it was a messy collection of high spots that lacked psychology and featured far too many botches. In any event, the challengers didn't go home with the tag straps, and neither one ever returned to Extreme Championship Wrestling. Hayabusa did tangle with RVD and Sabu once more before the year was over, mind, as he teamed with Tommy Dreamer in another losing effort on an FMW show featuring ECW talent that December. Number 6, Papi Chulo. One thing ECW deserves a ton of credit for is giving an American platform for the stars of Lucha Libre, as they brought in several AAA talents in the mid-90s. The likes of Rey Mysterio, Psychosis, and Juventud Guerrera tore the house down when they showed up at the ECW arena, opening the door for them to join WCW later on. Heyman would continue to book Mexican stars such as Super Crazy for the remainder of the decade, including one who was under contract to WWE at the time. At SummerSlam 99, Papi Chulo made his first and last appearance for Extreme Championship Wrestling as the opponent for fellow WWE star Taka Michinoku, who is making his own surprise return to ECW. If the name Papi Chulo doesn't ring a bell, you may know him better as Mr. Aguilar, who competed against Taka at WrestleMania 14, or more likely, S.A. Rios, the flame-haired former WWE light heavyweight champion who introduced the wider wrestling world to Lita. Anyway, at SummerSlam, Chulo and Michinoku had a decent fast-paced match that had a tough task in following similar but better matches between Jerry Lynn and Tajiri and Super Crazy and El Mosco. Number 5, Dick Murdoch. During the 1970s and 80s, Dick Murdoch was a big star and a major draw who worked on top and helped attract large crowds for various territories in the US as well as overseas in Japan. During the 90s, however, it was evident that Dirty Dick's best days were behind him, and save for a run alongside Dick Slater as the Hardliners in WCW in 1991, he primarily wrestled for smaller promotions. These smaller promotions included Smoky Mountain Wrestling and the Japanese company War, who both gave him somewhat regular bookings. The former NWA International Heavyweight Champion also popped up in Eastern Championship Wrestling for their Summer Sizzler Spectacular on June 19, 1993. Murdoch beat Dark Patriot 2, which was Doug Gilbert under a mask, in a short and unexceptional mid-card bout when he countered a body slam into an inside cradle. Dick Murdoch in his prime would have fit like a glove in ECW, as he was noted for his wild and heated brawls, but by this point in his career he was just picking up a paycheck and duly disappeared into the night. ECW did pay tribute to Murdoch when he passed away in '96, with the Sandman toasting him on their TV show. Number 4, the original Sheik. The original Sheik was another one whose wild man style laid the foundation for what ECW would become, as he became legendary for his bloody arena-wide brawls during his prime. Ed Farhat was well past that prime when he wrestled his one and only ECW match at 1994's The Night the Line Was Crossed. Sheik teamed with Pat Tanaka to defeat Kevin Sullivan and the Tasmaniac when he threw one of his trusty fireballs in Taz's face. According to reports, Heyman was against bringing the Sheik in, as he believed ECW needed to focus on youth, and if veterans were to be used, it should be to put younger talent over, something that the 67-year-old likely wouldn't have been able to do effectively. Then ECW owner Todd Gordon, however, was a huge fan of the Sheik and remembered him tearing the house down and drawing an impressive crowd for another Philadelphia-based indie a few years earlier, and insisted on bringing him in. Sheik's influence would continue to be felt after his one and only ECW match, of course, as his nephew/student Sabu remained one of the company's top stars for the rest of the decade. Number 3, Lenny Lane. Lenny Lane had only been wrestling for a couple of years when he got the opportunity to work for ECW on Valentine's Day 1997. Lane, who had a WWE Dark Squash match and a couple of tours of Michinoku Pro under his belt at this point, performed at a non-televised ECW live event in Webster, Massachusetts, taking on and putting over Beef Wellington. Now, you might think Beef Wellington is a stupid name for a wrestler, and you'd be right. Plus, the guy's real name was Wellington Wilkins Jr., which is a much better moniker. You might have initially assumed that Lane's opponent was the Beef Wellington who came out of Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling and wrestled for New Japan for a few years, but you would be wrong. That's a different Beef Wellington. There were more than one Beef Wellingtons, people. Incidentally, that Beef Wellington, let's call him the original Beef Wellington, also worked one ECW match, losing to Taz at a Matter of Respect 1996. As for Lenny Lane, he would soon get picked up by WCW and was challenging Ultimo Dragon for the TV title on Nitro just 2 months later. Number 2. Kerry Von Erich. 10 days after being busted for drugs, which was a violation of the probation he was on, Kerry Von Erich made a surprise appearance at ECW's 1993 Battle of the Belts. Kerry's appearance was not only a surprise to fans at the show, but to the man himself too. Von Erich had been signing at a wrestling convention that was being held at the Radisson Hotel in Philadelphia that weekend when he was asked to fill in for Kevin Sullivan, who wasn't able to make the ECW show. Brought in as woman's secret weapon, Kerry went to a double DQ with Salvatore Bellomo in what turned out to be the former Intercontinental Champion's third last match. In a funny moment, Kerry, who was meant to be a surprise and thus came out wearing a mask, had to be stopped backstage before going through the curtain as he was wearing a ring jacket with Kerry in big letters on the back. He removed the jacket, walked about 10 yards, and then put the jacket back on anyway, completely ruining the surprise. According to Todd Gordon, the party had already started for Kerry that day, and he had to be constantly reminded about why he was wearing a mask. Tragically, the Texas tornado was dead less than a month later. Number 1. Gary Albright. While ECW provided American wrestlers with a good alternative during the 90s, the strength of both New Japan and All Japan back then gave those lucky enough to get full-time gigs with either company a very good way to make a living in the business. Gary Albright was one of the top gaijin for All Japan and spent much of '96, which was something of a breakout year for the amateur standout, teaming with the likes of Stan Hansen, Rob Van Dam, and Sabu. Fresh off an 18-hour flight following his last tour of the year, Albright wrestled at ECW's Holiday Hell show, demolishing jobber Rick Rage. Sadly, Albright didn't really get over during the brief bout, and fans seemed a trifle bored by what was a one-sided squash. Like, guys, if you're bored by Gary freaking Albright wrecking some fool for a couple of minutes, maybe you should, I don't know, get a life or something? Just a thought. Obviously, Japan was Albright's priority, but it's somewhat surprising that he never came back to the ECW arena, as a match with another suplex specialist, Taz, seemed like a natural one to make.